The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 91. The Shadow Ghost. Part 1. The entire room was filled with silence. That was how strong Count Denver's remarks were. As they seemed to make no sense, Daniel Cairo said, "I do admit that Roman Dmitri is a great swordsman. He is a blessing for the Cairo kingdom. Considering he is a swordsman who achieved 3-star in his 20s and even defeated Homer. However, everyone gathered here knows that Roman Dmitri cannot change the trend of this war by that much. The reason the 4 factions of Cairo valued Roman was because of the value he would have in the future. As he achieved 3-star at such a young age, all were rushing to get him. But that also meant that Roman Dmitri could not win against the Hector kingdom right now. Roman's plan to cause internal division seemed nothing but the courage of a young warrior who hadn't seen the harsh reality of the world yet. Even Marquis Benedict sided with the king. I have the same thoughts. Roman Dmitri is the future of Cairo. It is more important to minimize the damage to the Cairo kingdom through wise judgment rather than losing such a young talent. In any case, the southern front has already been captured by the Hector kingdom. This is a war we have already lost. That was a realistic decision. Furthermore, Roman Dmitri was someone Marquis Benedict wanted to take in. There was no way he could let him die out there. Since he had already done his duty at the Southern Training Center, he was thinking of taking in Roman as soon as he came back. Thus, everyone was against Count Denver's plan. Based on the information they knew, no one would make the mistake of siding with Count Denver. What should I do? Count Denver suppressed the laugh that almost leaked out. He had managed to obtain some incredible information from the higher-ups. And if he told the truth here, the tide of war would be turned, but he didn't do that. Even though he had the blood of Cairo, his spirit was that of Valhalla. As everyone seems to be rejecting the plan, I won't push it further. However, I don't think it is necessary to give the Hector kingdom what they want so soon. As they have given us 3 days, we can move our troops in preparation for the war continuing forward. However, how about accepting the demands if there is no change on the southern front within the next 3 days? That was a compromise. Edwin Hector had given them 3 days to decide. It was enough time to come to a decision but not enough for them to overturn a war. Thus, Count Denver placed a bet. If meaningful results came thanks to that, then everyone would re-evaluate Roman's value. Then, he wouldn't only be revealed to be a 4-star, but a monster who far surpassed any ordinary 4-star or a swordsman. Was it because Count Denver made a reasonable proposal? Daniel Cairo, who had been thinking for a while, nodded his head. Either accept the proposal or reject it. We do need time. Thus, from now on, the Cairo kingdom will prepare for both continuing the war with Hector and moving forward with negotiations with them. He basically wanted to be prepared for any possibilities. Everyone except Count Denver had accepted the fact that the war was over when the Warp Gate was captured anyway. That meant they weren't expecting any miracles. At the same time, on the southern front, Henry Albert was blown away by the sight in front of him. Damn it! Back when he began to follow Roman, his chest was puffed with unfounded confidence. When he saw Roman, who had slaughtered countless enemies, he felt confident that he could overcome any danger. But what happened then? Things went wrong from the very start. Because of his poor stamina, he couldn't keep up even with Roman's troops and lost sight of them shortly after they had departed. And when he finally arrived at the Southern Training Center while searching for a trail, he saw a terrible sight. This is so fucked up. What he saw was truly horrifying. The place that had been peaceful a while ago was now a wasteland, and bodies with familiar faces were lying everywhere. Nevertheless, Roman Dmitri was nowhere to be seen. At that moment, his mind went blank. It was because of the ominous thought that Roman Dmitri might have lost. He turned back. We will retreat to the first defense line. The heroic spirit he had earlier was now lost. The only thing running through his mind now was safety. He needed a fence that could protect him from the enemies that had destroyed the Southern Training Center. However, the sight that greeted him when he reached the first defense line was also terrible. Oh, God. His mind went blank again. He truly had no idea how serious the current situation was. Although the Hector kingdom had made a surprise attack, the fifth defense line blocked them, thanks to Roman. Thus, he thought that there may be some way. The other defense lines had also blocked them. However, Henry Albert had no choice but to fall down on the ground while trembling when he saw the harsh reality with his own eyes. It's already over. The first defense line had also been destroyed. That was the horrible truth. As if it wasn't enough that the Southern Training Center had been attacked and destroyed, the first defense line was gone as well. Now, there was no hope of winning this war. He jumped up and admitted that Cairo had already been defeated. However, there was no need for Henry to sacrifice himself. We will retreat to the mountains right now. Move fast. He made a quick judgment. The mountains in the south weren't a suitable escape route because they were quite steep. Nevertheless, that was a much better option than dying. Henry Albert ran so hard that his body was totally drenched in sweat. His already low stamina had been depleted, and his soldiers' expressions looked like their souls were trying to exit their bodies. Still, Roman Dimitri's whereabouts were unknown. Nevertheless, even if he had survived and chosen to fight, holding on to the southern front was no different than jumping into a pit of fire. A hero of war? I don't need any of that fame. Living should be the highest priority. After running for a long time, the surrounding landscape changed, and he seemed to be in the middle of a grassy mountain. As he judged that he was safe now, he sat on the ground to catch his breath. Huff. 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 Huff, I lived. Some people might still be fighting below the mountain. Nevertheless, once he crossed the mountain, he would surely be safe. And just as he was thinking that, SHK. Shoo. Be quiet. Someone had drawn a cold sword to his neck. And the one who did that was Chris. Henry Albert, who was about to pee his pants, sighed when he saw it was Chris. But, why was Chris aiming his sword at Henry? It was to prevent him from making any sounds. Once he retrieved the sword, Chris took the lead and started walking. Follow me. Was it because of the relief of being alive? Henry just followed him silently. Why is Roman's knight here? It was strange. Roman Dimitri said he was heading to the rear, so why was his knight in the middle of the mountain? He thought he might have come to the mountain because of the attack on the Southern Training Center, but that also didn't make any sense. That was because if Henry had been in that position, he would have already crossed the mountain. Although he had escaped quite far, he couldn't say that the enemy wouldn't be able to pursue him till here. How far did they walk? Henry Albert's eyes widened when he saw the new scenery before him. What is this? Although he had only taken a few steps, the landscape had totally changed. What was before him now was a perfectly prepared camp. It stayed covered while covering a suitable size for a camp, and there was a space for the soldiers to rest as well. It was hard for Henry to believe this place was in the middle of the mountain. Considering the size of the camp, he should have been able to see it from far away, but only when he came close did he see it. His soldiers' reactions were the same as his. And seeing that he wasn't the only one stunned, Henry asked, "When the hell did you build such a hideout?" Chris still didn't stop walking. Once he signaled the guards to say there wasn't any danger, he answered Henry's question. On the way to the rear of the southern front, we confirmed that the training center had been attacked. Then, our liege decided that the rear had already collapsed, so he commanded us to go straight to the mountains and established this secret hideout. Then we must run over the mountain and get to safety. Why are you all still staying here? Chris stopped walking and turned to look at Henry with eyes full of disgust. The war isn't over yet. The reason we are here is to protect our allies, like Mr. Henry, and kill the enemies who will come to the mountains. A mountain is a good place to face enemies with a small number of troops. If you had been one of Hector's troops, my sword wouldn't have stopped at the neck, but would have cut it off before you even realized what was going on. That was a cruel remark. There was a wall of status between Chris and Henry, yet Henry didn't say anything as he had seen Chris in action now. Roman and his soldiers, each one of them was a monster. And particularly, Chris was someone who had outstanding fighting skills even among those monsters. How does the Dmitri family have so many monsters? It was already tough for him to accept. Still, as he couldn't see Roman anywhere, he asked Chris about him. Then, Chris answered, "My liege is currently dealing with the enemies of Hector on the front line." Henry Albert's face turned pale. As he expected, Roman Dmitri was crazy. Winning or losing a war was directly related to one thing, the loser's death. Immediately after the first defense line collapsed, the troops trying to flee from there started being slaughtered unilaterally. Slash. Quack. Ack. There was no way they could survive. Cairo's soldiers only groaned as they were being attacked from all sides, and they fell one after another while screaming. Edwin Hector had nailed the need for many prisoners. However, as they had taken the entire southern front over in such a short time, too many prisoners would obviously be dangerous. That was why a massacre was currently going on. Death and blood could be seen everywhere. Brandt, who was a lieutenant of the 1st Defense Line, couldn't hide his pale expression as he looked at the rapidly declining army. "Donald, you bastard." Before they were attacked, Brandt had witnessed Count Donald talk to Roman on a call, and if Donald had only listened to Roman's suggestion, the current slaughter would have been avoided. Nevertheless, Donald said that retreating was a shame, but because of that, the 1st defense line had now fallen. The Hector kingdom is fully prepared. They started with a surprise attack, occupied the rear, and even brought flares. This was a fight we could never win. That's probably why Roman Dmitri suggested we retreat to the mountains. I mean, he was aiming for another plan, but it meant abandoning the southern front. He didn't mean to say it was cowardly. Instead, he thought Roman's decision was right. In exchange for the carelessness, the rear of the southern front was occupied so quickly, and from that moment, the results were already decided. It was an overwhelming defeat. The bitter taste still lingered in his mouth. There was so much blood that just the smell of blood was enough to make him want to puke. Whack! The soldier right beside him fell to the ground. As it was a situation in which the enemy's spear had pierced the soldier's head, Brandt swung his sword toward him instantly. Swish! However, the attack failed, even though it was almost instantaneous. And when his eyes met the furious eyes of the one who looked like a knight, goosebumps rose all over Brandt's body. Is this it? He could feel the next attack coming toward him. He knew at the moment their defense line collapsed, the fact that everyone on the southern front, including himself, would not be able to go back alive. It was messed up. However, the moment he was about to accept his death. Swish! Whack! Blood splattered on the ground. And simultaneously, the head of Hector Kingdom's knight could be seen in the air. Then, in front of Brandt, who was astounded, a man with black hair suddenly appeared. Chapter 92. The Shadow Ghost. Part 2. The soldiers of Hector literally couldn't believe the sight before them. Rather than the fact that a knight of Hector was killed in a single blow, they were stunned seeing a man running toward all of them by himself. An enemy. Kill him. Dozens of soldiers of Hector rushed in to take down the one man who had managed to kill a knight of Hector with a single blow. And Roman Dmitri, who had appeared on the battlefield all alone, struck the enemies head-on as if the massive difference in number was nothing to him. Slash. Papak. Quayak. It was literally a one-sided massacre. The soldiers who had rushed in great force had already left the world while screaming, and the soldiers who had stopped to comprehend what just happened had their entire bodies cut down by a single sword. It was literally just a sword. There was no sign of even an aura on that sword. Although it was purely based on physical ability, Roman Dmitri was slaughtering his enemies as if it was too easy. One by one, every time Roman moved his sword, death followed. Some even stretched out their arms to try and hold down Roman, but before their arms even stretched entirely, Roman killed dozens of soldiers in his vision. He was truly a monster. Nevertheless, the thing even more shocking than the overwhelming force was that Roman was fighting all of them by himself. This is insane. The enemy is alone. Keep calm and attack him. Attack from all directions. It was an unusual situation. Too many soldiers were focusing on a single enemy, but they still couldn't understand how Roman was committing a one-sided slaughter despite being all alone. Hector's soldiers continued to groan. Their common sense obviously said that a large group would win against a single enemy, but as the fight progressed, the corpses lying on the floor were only those of Hector's soldiers. Nevertheless, they didn't know it was an unfair fight in the first place. They didn't know that Roman was someone who, rather than injuring his enemies over time, cut off their necks whenever he got the chance. From start to finish, it didn't take that long. Shortly after Brant recognized that the existence before him was Roman, what seemed to be hell in his eyes had unfolded on the battlefield. Whack! That was the end. Even the last soldier had now fallen down on the ground. And seeing all of Hector's soldiers lying on the ground without even moving slightly, Brant looked at Roman with a pale expression. What the hell just happened? Brant couldn't believe that such a monster existed in the Cairo kingdom. The greeting was short. When Brant saw Roman introduce himself as Roman Dimitri, his heart began to pound intensely. Was it really true that he was going to do the guerrilla operation? When he saw him talk with Count Donald, he mentioned abandoning the first defense line. However, that could also be seen as giving up the southern front. It was a common-sense decision anyway. As the warp gate had already fallen into the enemy's hands, there was no way for them to survive against the Hector kingdom while staying here. The geographical advantage of mountains? That looked like a joke as well. The Hector kingdom would surely have a hard time dealing with the remnants hiding in the mountains, but there was no place on the southern front that they could use as a fortress now. Summarily, guerrilla operations weren't a good strategy. While they were taking advantage of being in the mountains, the enemy could instead block the escape route and annihilate the remnants as well. Nevertheless, Roman Dimitri stayed. Although he had enough time to escape, he didn't give up on this place. Come to think of it, it was a bit unusual even when he contacted Count Donald. He noticed that the warp gate was captured but still contacted us and suggested we run away as well. It almost seemed like foresight now. Obviously, Roman's judgment was correct, but the guerrilla operation was still reckless. Nevertheless, Brant couldn't help but look at Roman with respect. Roman Dimitri knew he was in danger, but he stayed behind and continued to fight for the Cairo kingdom. Thus, Brant said, "Sir Roman Dimitri, you were right. Count Donald made a decision to stay and ended up dead, even though you had given him the right advice, and the first defense line has now fallen into the hands of the Hector kingdom. This war is already over. The Hector kingdom has already gone to deal with the second defense line, and they won't last that long." He bowed his head. He didn't know why Roman was moving all alone, but he was sure that the guerrilla operation would be meaningless now. Knowing who Roman Dimitri was, Brant rather raised his voice and urged Roman to get to safety. "You want me to give up?" "Yes. There are things in the world that are physically impossible. I have just witnessed how strong Sir Roman Dimitri is, but the number of people the Hector kingdom has brought is too large. There is no way you can defeat all of them by yourself. So, how about retreating through the mountains? No one will point there. Hands at you. I have witnessed how Sir Roman Dimitri has truly done his best here, and I will let the others know about it as well. So, please make a wise judgment and get to safety." Perhaps? Brant thought that Roman had come back to take revenge for someone he lost while going up against Hector. Actually, he could think of no other reason why Roman Dimitri would be moving alone with his common sense. Therefore, he thought that Roman had lost his subordinates and was now getting revenge for them. It's a wise decision. Roman judged that Brant's advice wasn't wrong. Actually, even if they all retreated now, no one would think bad about Roman. Still, I don't like it. That was not because of patriotism. That wasn't because Roman Dmitry was from Cairo and the southern front where he was serving fell into the hands of the Hector kingdom starred. The only reason Roman judged it like that was because it was a matter of self-esteem. Roman didn't want to make words like even though Roman was present on the battlefield, he didn't make much of a difference and did nothing into reality. That was the same reason Roman had risked his life for. Still, for something like risking one's life, the gains to be gained here were small, and there was much to lose. Nevertheless, in the process of being born to reaching the peak in Murim, a world where the weak served as food for the strong, Baek Jung-hyuk learned one thing. I cannot set a precedent that undermines me even once. That was it. That was why he stayed here and didn't run away. And gazing directly into Brandt's eyes, Roman said, "No. This war hasn't ended yet." Roman looked back at the situation from the outbreak of war till now. The situation of the Hector kingdom is bad due to famine. As the food to feed people has turned scarce, it is impossible for them to properly secure military supplies. Nevertheless, the fact that they waged war means that the Hector kingdom was in a desperate situation. It was a simple thing. Hector was aiming to solve their nation's problems through this war. All of Hector's kingdom's actions can be explained by such a strategy. There is little incentive to them invading the southern front, given it is barren when compared to other areas. But after observing how they made an effort to get control of the southern front and capture the warp gate rather than launch a straightforward invasion across the border, they were aiming to isolate the southern front flawlessly. They will probably try to contact the higher-ups now and negotiate until they come to an agreement. Roman read the intentions of his enemies. As Hector wanted to end the war as soon as possible, their weakness was exposed. Thus, Roman said, this war is a very special case. The reason the Hector kingdom wanted to occupy the southern front so soon was because they couldn't afford this war to go on for a long time, along with the obvious reason of reducing their own sacrifices. Every war has a purpose. And Hector's purpose is to solve their nation's difficulties through this war. That is why they are aiming to completely capture the southern front. They want to negotiate without any problems. What? Brandt was stunned. Roman's words were hard to understand. Going to war because the nation was going through difficulties. How could he accept something like this as the reason? It is a simple matter. The Hector kingdom attacked the southern front, which they couldn't even profit much with. Do you think that Hector will continue to defend the southern front while their people continue to starve in the nation? Of course not. They are now betting the fate of their nation here. When the nation was on the brink of destruction, Hector decided to draw their sword to live. If they did nothing, they were going to die anyway. Thus, they made their last effort to continue to survive, wage war. Roman made his decision. We do not have to face the forces of Hector out here. If the number of enemies is 10,000, then dealing with only 100 of them, which is only 1%, will change the tide of this war. The Hector kingdom will suffer because of staying out here, and the royal family of Cairo will not easily accept the request of Hector. That is why we have hope. That much is enough. Just by creating a small variable, we can burn the plans of Hector to the ground. When he heard those words, Brandt couldn't hide his admiration. The thoughts he had weren't wrong. Roman wasn't an ordinary person, and his perspective on the battlefield was quite unique. The only problem was that Roman's plan wasn't as easy as he made it sound. Will that even be possible? It is possible. Brandt couldn't continue any further. That was because before he even asked Roman about his doubts, we have already achieved the intended purpose. Roman Dmitry shocked him. The Hector kingdom had begun its attack on the second defense line. Charge. Thud. Rumble. The flare shot the wall. Some of the walls had already collapsed due to the repetitive attacks, and Cairo's soldiers could be seen screaming while being covered in flames. Nevertheless, Edwin Hector wasn't attacking them in a hurry. Now that they had finished contacting the royal family, time was on Hector's side. From now on, minimizing the damage on their side was the highest priority. The plan is perfect. They had been preparing for it for 1 year. And Edwin Hector had finally turned the situation he had played countless times in his mind into reality. While distracting the enemy's focus, they occupied the warp gate. That was when the war had already ended for Cairo. In Edwin's plan, once they captured the warp gate, there was no possibility of them losing this war. Actually, even saying they had already crossed the hurdles wouldn't have been an overstatement either. From now on, they only needed to deal with the remnants of Cairo and receive an appropriate compensation to end this war. Nevertheless, even though the entire situation seemed advantageous, Edwin Hector still had troubles in his heart. In my plan, Baron McCleary's death was never counted for. The 5th defense line is the weakest among all the defense lines. However, Baron McCleary still died. Roman Dmitri. Does it mean that he was a variable powerful enough to overcome the vast difference in power? Edwin Hector always doubted himself. Even if he was in a situation in which everything was going smoothly, he always looked back and tried to find any mistakes or things he might have missed. Nevertheless, no matter how many times he had looked back, the variable known as Roman Dmitri didn't seem to be that strong. His reputation was well known, but a 3-star or a swordsman wasn't someone who could turn the tides of war. Contrary to the original plan, our attack on the 5th defense line failed. What are the variables we need to watch out for? Even though I have looked through it repetitively, there are no variables strong enough to put us at risk. Even if Roman Dmitri leads an entire army against Hector, Cairo cannot defeat Hector with their current power on the southern front. Even if Roman Dimitri's force is more than we expected, although it could be difficult, it wouldn't be fatal. The Hector kingdom is not weak enough to be swayed by only a single individual. Before he attacked the 2nd defense line, Edwin Hector had given the order to deal with any remnants of Cairo. He was concerned they would increase Roman's force, so he decided to block anything like that from happening. He did his best to suppress his doubts. Even though his nerves kept warning him, his head had concluded that nothing wrong would happen. Just then, a soldier entered and reported, "Prince Edwin. The contact with the 1st Battalion, which had left to deal with the remnants of Cairo, has been lost." Even though it was only one report, the ominous thing soon spread. "We have lost contact with the 2nd Battalion. The contact with the 3rd Battalion is no different." With each report, Edwin Hector's face turned as cold as ice. Because of the variable, his ominous feelings seemed to be turning into reality. Chapter 93. The Shadow Ghost. Part 3. Edwin Hector headed to the barracks and left behind the battlefield. As the barracks were the designated spot where commands were given, all of the commanders under him were also ordered to arrive. "Jackson. Report the situation." "Yes, Prince." The leader of the Ranger unit, Jackson, stepped forward. The 3rd Battalion was mobilized to deal with the remnants of Cairo immediately after we dealt with the 1st defense line. However, contact with them has been lost since around an hour ago. At first, I thought there might have been an issue with the magic stone, but seeing that we have lost contact with 3 battalions, it seems the enemy has initiated the counterattack. What is the expected damage? Around 300 people, Prince. As soon as Edwin heard that, his expression turned cold. They had initiated this war with a perfect plan. Nevertheless, the fact that a single variable dealt with their warriors made his heart shudder. Most of the forces on the southern front had locked the gates and chose to retreat. Thus, it could only have been Roman Dmitri who killed Baron McCleary and decided to cause damage to us even in such a situation. The fear seems to have turned into reality. Roman Dmitri chose not to flee to the mountains, but to remain on the southern front and fight against us. Edwin's voice was chilling. He didn't like, from the beginning, whenever the name of Roman Dmitri came forward in this war. That was because, from the first time the cogwheel in his plan had gone awry, Edwin Hector kept noticing his name every time a problem occurred. We will have to alter the plan. Leaving someone like Roman Dmitri alive will certainly come back to bite us later on. Commander. A square-faced man, one of the commanders under Edwin, continued in a firm voice, as the commander has said, a variable that wasn't accounted for in the original plan has occurred. Baron McCleary is dead, and Roman Dmitri is probably planning to mobilize the remnants of Cairo. Nevertheless, that isn't important. The southern front has 5 defense lines along with the rear. With the most important position, the rear, and the first defense line in our grasp, capturing the rest of the southern front will surely weaken Cairo's counter even more. We should see the big picture. Instead of focusing on a rat like Roman Dmitri, it is more important to entirely destroy the defense lines. Roman Dmitri was a small variable? Even if he was, if this siege failed and swayed because of him, their entire plan would burn down to ashes. In the next 3 days, they couldn't give Cairo any chance to counter them. Even if some variables had occurred, they had planned to destroy the defense and choke down the breath of the entire southern front within 3 days. That was why Edwin was dissuaded by what he was told. He was the star of Hector. From his long experience, he knew that he didn't act normal whenever discomfort kept disturbing his thoughts. Nevertheless, Edwin had already made his decision. No. What is important now is not to focus on the second defense line, which cannot even counterattack, but to deal with the variable that has messed up our plan through unexpected methods. Withdraw the troops right now. From now on, we will completely annihilate the rats of the southern front. As soon as they heard those words, the faces of all the commanders under Edwin were dyed with shock. The second line of defense wouldn't last long. With victory in sight, it wasn't easy for all the commanders to follow Edwin's new command. Eventually, a commander said, "It is a reckless decision. There will only be a few remnants left. It won't be too late to kill them all once we have captured the defense lines. And how can it be possible for the enemy to turn the tide with such a small force?" That was correct. Also, it wasn't like Edwin didn't know that, but from the moment he received the first report that was related to Roman Dmitri, he didn't like how the plan was going. It was because of his instincts and senses. Most people say that instinct and common sense are two different things, but, in the end, instinct always originated from common sense. After revising the plan, something that he had already done countless times over the past year, his instincts told him that Roman Dmitri was a risk. Edwin Hector said, "I understand what you mean. Nevertheless, as the commander, I need to be prepared for the worst. And the worst thing I am worried about isn't failing to bring down all 5 defense lines. It is Roman Dmitri, who is doing unexpected things on this southern front. We don't have time. If Roman Dmitri manages to create an unpredictable variable, then the situation will turn out worse than if we are not able to capture the defense lines." It was a simple matter. Among problems that could be fixed and problems that could not be fixed, Edwin considered the latter as more important. It would be fine if he managed to take down the defense lines, but he couldn't understand Roman Dmitri's actions completely. Not the worst, but definitely the lesser evil. If the majority of you all think that capturing the second defense line is a priority, even after hearing my explanation, I will let go of my stubbornness and follow your opinion. Actually, they all knew that Edwin had a good reason to make that decision. Still, the reason they asked him to think was because any human could make a mistake. Everyone nodded, which meant they understood. Jackson spoke for everyone, "We will follow your words." Nevertheless, did they know that, by that judgment, the Hector kingdom had set foot in the southern mountains earlier than expected, and Roman Dmitri was waiting for them to arrive there? The sun went down. While the peasants went home and had dinner with their families, a bright fire lit up in the darkness. Crackle. Crackle. The bright fire was created when Hector's soldiers lit their torches. When you find the enemies, do not attack hastily. The topmost priority is to blow the whistle and inform everyone else. The remnants of Cairo have Aura swordsmen as well. Thus, if we push our enemies into a corner and attack them at once, we will be able to take all of them down without taking much damage. We understand. The commanders of the 2nd and 3rd battalions, who were in charge of the search in some places, both raised their voices. The southern mountains were wide. Obviously, if one tried to search quickly, one would miss the enemy. That was why they were slowly searching for the enemies. There was a risk of losing one's life if the enemies appeared suddenly, but simultaneously, the enemies would be surrounded once their location was revealed. That was Edwin's idea. Rather than wasting time with an ambiguous search, Edwin wanted to wipe out all the enemies in the mountains at once. Crackle. The nearby darkness was pushed away by the fire. The soldiers continued to climb the mountain slowly. They were looking around meticulously, to the point of even checking out the sound of someone stepping on dry leaves. Huh. The commander, who had taken the lead, exhaled his breath and continued to look around with a stiff face. The survivor who had followed Baron McCleary into battle had told him that Roman Dmitri was truly like a shadow ghost on the battlefield. The moment any soldier showed the slightest carelessness, their heads were cut off by him. No matter how prepared they were to fight, even though they had vowed to risk their lives for the nation, no one wanted to die first. Step. Step. When the flame shone in the darkness, the area that couldn't be seen earlier lit up. On the right? Nothing is wrong, answered the soldier who was following right next to him. When the commander saw that the soldier was moving while even pricking the ground with a stick, he decided it was safe to turn his head back and continue his own search. At that moment, swish! Darkness covered the soldier. Let alone blowing the whistle, he couldn't even make any movements to call for help. It was because, even though it was a fleeting moment, his neck had already been twisted. The soldier, who had died because of not being able to check properly, made a blunt sound as he fell down. Nevertheless, the commander didn't hear that. No, it wasn't just the commander, but the entire battalion moved forward as if nothing was wrong. Left? Nothing is wrong. As soon as he turned his head back again, another death occurred. Once the commander had confirmed that there were no issues, the darkness had again covered a soldier and taken his life. 1 death, 2 deaths, and so on. Actually, it didn't feel strange at first. However, when he saw that the surrounding fires had dimmed down extremely, the commander realized something had gone wrong. What is this? His face turned white when he saw there was no soldier behind him. Even when he had started, the surrounding area was brightly illuminated by the fire torches, but now, only darkness could be seen behind him. His heart sank down to the bottom. He hurriedly blew the whistle as he realized that the others had died even though they were walking so closely. No, he tried to blow it. Swish! As soon as he placed the whistle in his mouth, the commander's neck was twisted. Thus, with a whistle in his mouth, the commander also collapsed, as if he was a doll with a broken thread. Still, that was only the start of it. Soon, all over the mountains, Hector's soldiers began to die one by one. The secret didn't last long. The death of the soldiers was discovered soon after a loud whistle pierced the stillness of the darkness and resounded everywhere. Beep! Beep! The enemy has appeared. Check out the allies. We must cut off the escape route and drive the enemy to one place. Everyone was obviously upset. All soldiers turned their eyes back and forth to check their surroundings. Among them, there were also aura swordsmen who were using aura to illuminate the darkness, and those who were using magic artifacts. Nonetheless, no matter how many times they looked, they couldn't see the enemy anywhere. Just where is he? They didn't understand how someone next to them had disappeared without even making a sound. Far away from them, there was a man who was covered by darkness. The judgment of the Hector kingdom is bolder than I expected. I was initially planning to take full advantage of the guerrilla operation as they focused their attacks on the defense lines, but they decided to block a variable first. Who is their leader? The judgment he has made, from the surprise attack to capturing Warp Gate, is enough to prove he is not an ordinary person. He suppressed his laughter. Seeing how Hector had reacted to this extreme situation, Roman didn't panic because of the enemy's smartness, but felt a fire rise up in his heart. He could see lights all over the mountain. That meant that instead of leading only one battalion to search and deal with the remnants, the enemy commander had decided to bring all the forces he could to deal with the remnants and left only a minimal number of troops who were pressuring the defense lines even now. The southern mountain range is steep, and it is a terrain where there are limited places to hide. The commander of the Hector kingdom was perfectly aware of that, and he decided to boldly abandon the areas where the remnants couldn't hide and only initiated the search in the other areas. His judgment is amazing. Actually, even Roman's troops were there at the places the enemy commander had selected, but still, the Hector kingdom hadn't expected one variable. They didn't know what kind of person Roman Dmitri was. The rugged mountains and blinding darkness were factors that didn't let anyone see even an inch ahead. They limited the movements of both sides, but Roman Dmitri, who had lived as Baek Jung-hyuk, was able to move freely in the dark. It's been a long time since I felt this kind of feeling. How to fight using the darkness, most people thought that Baek Jung-hyuk was someone who always fought his enemies head-on. Nevertheless, the truth was quite different. Back when Baek Jung-hyuk didn't have power to meet his father's expectations, he had to adapt to living in the gloomy darkness. At that time, there was a name Baek Jung-hyuk earned and was frequently called the Shadow Ghost. He was just like the shadow of a ghost, something that no one could predict the actions of and see. Roman was calmly waiting for Hector's next decision. And when the darkness finally covered the entire mountain, it became the stage of Baek Jung-hyuk, the heavenly demon, and the shadow ghost.